I've always been a fan of running at night. There's something relaxing about feeling the cool breeze on my face while the world around me is calm. No traffic, no bike noises. Just me, my footsteps on the pavement, and the darkness around. About a year ago, I started swapping my daytime runs for nighttime ones for that very reason. It felt like I had the whole city to myself, especially the quieter streets in my neighborhood. But that night was different. I was following my usual route, a well-lit path lined with family homes. Nothing particularly interesting. I was feeling great, had just passed the 5-mile mark, and thought, why not explore a new trail tonight? Change it up a bit, test my limits. That's how I decided to take a less familiar route, a bit farther out, where the streetlights were more spaced out and the silence felt absolute. First, it seemed like a good idea. The streets were completely deserted, with only the occasional car passing by and the constant sound of my sneakers hitting the pavement. Felt like freedom. I turned a corner I'd never turned before. The scenery changed. The houses there were older, with neglected facades and overgrown yards. I remember thinking, I'll just do a quick loop around here and head back home. And that's when I saw him. Across the street, further ahead, a man was walking. That's all. He was walking calmly and didn't seem to notice me. I figured he was just another person heading home, so I kept running, trying to maintain my pace. But a few minutes later, something made me glance back, and there he was, now on the same side of the street as me. It was odd. Before, he was walking slowly, kind of distracted, but now, he was running, and in the same direction as me. I tried to convince myself it was just a coincidence. Maybe he was going to the same place, or perhaps he decided to run too. But as my pace increased, so did his. Every time I sped up, he did the same, maintaining a precise distance between us. His footsteps echoed right behind me, firm, synchronized with mine. My heart started to race, not just from the exertion of running, but from the discomfort that was quickly turning into fear. When I slowed down to see if he'd follow, he slowed down too. I sped up, he sped up. That man was clearly following me. I wanted to believe it was just a coincidence, or that he was messing with his speed. But something about his movements, firm, deliberate, set off every alarm inside me. And now, I had to decide what to do. At that moment, I knew I needed to get off that street. I was trying not to panic, but the fear started tightening in my chest. I looked ahead and saw that the lighting was better further down. My plan was simple. Reach those brighter lights and maybe find more people nearby. I started running a little faster, trying to look casual, but my eyes were fixed on the shadows, trying to catch any strange movement. When I finally reached the more well-lit area, I discreetly looked back. And there he was, standing at the corner just watching, like he'd made up his mind not to step into the light. That gave me chills. The man kept following me, but always keeping a distance, always in the shadows, as if he didn't want to be clearly seen. I couldn't head straight home. That would be like showing this stranger who seemed determined to follow me exactly where I lived. So, I did what any sensible person would do. I decided to run where there were more people. A busier area, where I could lose him in the crowd or at least have a chance to ask for help. So I turned left, then right, taking quicker turns than usual, trying to shake him off. But every time I glanced back, he was there, moving silently, always in the shadows, always lurking. It felt like he knew exactly where I was going, and the idea that he might be able to predict my movements made my heart pound even harder. I needed to get away, to get out of those dark streets and reach somewhere safe. Finally, I saw a bar with a small group of people gathered outside. They were laughing, chatting, and at that moment, they seemed like a beacon of hope to me. I ran toward them, trying to look as calm as possible, but inside, I was panicking. Before reaching the group, I took one last look behind me. He had stopped, at the edge of the illuminated area, just standing there, staring directly at me. It was like the light was a barrier he didn't want to cross. And then he simply turned around and vanished into the darkness. My body relaxed for a second, but even so, I ran to the bar. I was out of breath, my heart still racing, and I approached the group of people, trying to make it seem like I was just there for some fresh air. But the truth was I was hiding. I stayed there with those people for a while, trying to process what had happened, making sure he wouldn't come back. And when I finally felt safe, I made my way back home, only running along well-lit streets and constantly looking around. No matter how much I tried to relax, the feeling of being watched stayed with me, like those eyes were still in the darkness, waiting for the opportunity to appear again. After that night, I promised myself I wouldn't explore new routes anymore. I'd stick to the areas I knew well, where there were lights and movement. And for a good while, that's exactly what I did. My runs went back to what they used to be. A peaceful moment, just me, my breathing, and the familiar streets of my neighborhood. The sense of safety gradually returned, and eventually, that strange experience became nothing more than a scary memory. Then, one night, months later, I was running along an old route, one I did almost every week. It was a quiet night, cool enough to make the run enjoyable. As I followed the path, the streets were empty as usual, and the streetlights cast long, dancing shadows over the pavement. You know, the kind of shadows that seemed to move along with the wind? There was a house I always passed by, one that had been abandoned for a long time. It seemed out of place, with overgrown weeds around it, peeling paint on the walls and boarded-up windows. I was always curious why it was left like that, and my parents told me that years ago, someone had died tragically inside, and no one wanted to buy it. So it just sat there, decaying over time. But that night, something was different. As I ran past the house, I noticed that the front door, which was always securely shut, was slightly open. The boards covering the windows looked loose, like someone had forced their way inside. I slowed my pace, trying to see more clearly, trying to figure out what was out of place. That's when I noticed a faint, flickering light coming from behind the partially open door. It wasn't strong like an electric lamp. It was more like candlelight. I stopped, took a deep breath, and tried to listen. Whatever that light was, it seemed to be moving, bobbing up and down as if someone were walking around with it. I know I should have just kept running, ignored it, and moved on, but curiosity paralyzed me. Slowly, I approached, getting closer to the open door, trying to peek inside without being noticed. And then I saw them. Shadows of people moving through the narrow hallway. It was hard to make out any details, but the movement was unmistakable. There were at least 2, maybe 3 figures inside that house. I thought they might be teenagers sneaking in to explore, or maybe a homeless person looking for shelter. I was about to continue on my way, but something kept me there, observing a little longer. That's when I smelled a strong cigar smoke. It didn't make sense. Who breaks into an abandoned house, lights candles, and smokes cigars? The more I watched, the more I saw those shadows moving strangely, like they were part of some sort of ritual. And then, I saw a figure sitting right in the middle of the room. They were making gestures with their hands, big, intense movements like they were speaking or praying over something. That's when the board I was leaning against creaked, making a sharp noise. The seated figure stopped immediately, and then, as if they knew I was there, they stood up, turned in my direction, and blew out the light. It was as if the entire house suddenly plunged into complete darkness. My heart raced and I ran. I ran as fast as I could, not looking back, fear pushing me with every step until I finally reached a street that led straight to my house. When I got home, I thought about calling the police, telling them what I'd seen, but I didn't even know how to explain it. "Hi, I think there's someone doing something in an abandoned house, but I'm not sure what." It was too absurd. The next day, I passed by the house again on my way to work, and it was just as always. Door shut, boards patched over the windows, no signs of activity. But something inside me knew that what I'd seen wasn't a dream. Every time I run down that street now, I glance at that house, hoping to see something again. But since that night, nothing. Just that silence, as if everything had gone back to normal. As if I'd never been there. A few weeks passed after that incident, and I tried to push it out of my head. I was still running, but I stuck to familiar areas, well-lit routes that I knew. But no matter how much I tried to convince myself it was just a one-off, I couldn't shake that house, that figure in the darkness. It was on a rainy night that I finally decided to face my fear. The weather was bad, the rain was pouring down, and most people would stay home. So I thought, tonight's the perfect night to run without running into anyone, and off I went. I decided to pass by the abandoned houses street as a way to prove to myself that there was nothing scary about it, that it was all in my head. When I got there, the rain was so heavy I could barely see ahead of me. The streetlights were distorted by the raindrops, and everything looked foggy, almost like I was running in a dream. As I approached the house, my stomach twisted with nerves, but curiosity was stronger. I needed to see if anything had changed. That's when I saw it again. The door was open, and this time even wider than before. The rain was hitting the entrance, and inside, I saw that light again. A candle, flickering, almost going out with the wind and water pouring in through the door. But this time there was something different. I could see shadows again, moving quickly through the interior, further back than the last time. The strangest thing was what happened next. The light wasn't alone. It was moving, as if someone was holding it, bobbing up and down like whoever was carrying it was walking through the house. I approached slowly, trying to be as silent as possible, letting the noise of the rain mask my footsteps. And then I saw it clearly, a figure standing in the middle of the room with their back to me. He, or she, I'm not sure, was holding something that looked like a candle, but it was small and dim, barely lighting up the surroundings. What left me breathless was the way this person was dressed. Dark clothes, covered by what looked like a long coat, and their heads slightly tilted forward, as if whispering to the flame. It didn't seem like they were alone. Further in the back, I could see other shadows, more blurred, as if moving slowly in a circle, maybe. My first thought was to run, but my feet felt glued to the ground. Curiosity and fear were battling inside me. I needed to know what was happening, but at the same time, every part of my body was telling me to flee. I tried to see more, stretching my neck to look through the half-open door, and that's when one of the boards covering the window creaked with a loud snap. The figure in the room stopped and slowly turned in my direction. My heart stopped at that moment. I couldn't see the face clearly. It was hidden by the darkness and the rain, but I knew they were looking straight at me. We stood there for a second, which felt like an eternity, me frozen at the entrance of the house, and that figure staring back. Then they moved, too quickly for me to react, rushing towards the door. Before I could do anything, the candlelight went out, and darkness took over everything. I ran. I didn't think twice. I just turned and bolted down the street, the rain hitting my face and my footsteps echoing on the wet pavement. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see if someone was following me, if that stranger had come after me. I ran until I reached a well-lit area where cars were passing and forced myself to stop and breathe. I was safe, at least for now. That night haunted me for days. I tried to find out who those people were in the house, what they were doing, but I couldn't find any answers. I knew I wouldn't go back to that street anytime soon, but something told me that house and whatever was inside it was still waiting for me. After that night, my routine changed. I avoided the street with the abandoned house, but it didn't bring me the peace I expected. Every time I ran, even on different routes, I always felt like someone was watching me. Every shadow seemed to move. Every sound behind me felt like a footstep. Paranoia took over, but I tried to ignore it and keep running, thinking the fear would eventually go away. Until one night, while I was almost finished with my run, I decided to take a route that would lead me close to that house's street. I knew it wasn't a good idea, but it was like something was pulling me there. I wanted to be sure it was all just in my head. Maybe seeing the house once more, empty and shut, would bring me the relief I needed. But when I got close, my heart sank. The door was closed, yes, but this time there was something different. The windows weren't just covered by loose boards anymore. They were patched up with new boards, freshly nailed, as if someone had gone out of their way to lock everything up again. I stood there for a moment trying to understand. Who would have gone back there? Who would have done all this? I looked at the door, trying to see if there was any movement inside. I got a bit closer, but it was all silent. No lights, no sound, just darkness on the inside. And then, I noticed something on the ground, right in front of the entrance. It was a small object, glinting under the faint streetlight. I bent down and, with trembling hands, picked up what seemed to be a key. An old key made of heavy metal, like it belonged to a wooden door like the ones in that house. I slowly stood up, holding the key in my hand, staring at that locked-up, boarded-up house. For a moment, I considered using it, going inside to see what was happening, to finally find out who those figures were. But then it hit me. What if it was a warning? What if the key was left there as a trap, a way to lure me into the house? That's when I heard a faint sound, a rustling, coming from somewhere near the surrounding trees. I quickly turned, trying to find the source of the noise, but there was nothing there, just the wind blowing through the leaves. The key in my hand felt like it weighed a ton, and the feeling of being watched came back with full force. I dropped the key on the ground. I ran out of there as fast as I could, not looking back. I didn't want to know what was going on in that house. I didn't want to be involved in that mystery anymore. Since then, I've never gone near that street again. But sometimes, when I'm running through quieter areas, I still get the feeling that I'm being followed. And whenever I look back, I see no one, but I remember the key. I remember that figure in the darkness. And I know that somehow, that house still watches me. And that, at any moment, I could be drawn back to it. I was on a long drive late at night, trying to make it to my parents' house before dawn. It had been a long day, and my eyes felt heavy. So when I spotted a small, run-down motel on the side of the highway, I thought, why not? A few hours of sleep will do me good. The motel looked like it had seen better days, way better days. The neon sign was half-lit, flickering with the word vacancy in a way that made it seem like it was buzzing out a warning. But I was tired. Too tired to care about how creepy the place looked, and all I wanted was a bed. Inside the tiny lobby, an old man with sunken eyes and a worn-out baseball cap sat behind the counter. He gave me this odd smile, like he was relieved to have a guest. There was something unsettling about him, but I brushed it off as just a weird vibe. It was late, after all. He handed me a rusty key attached to an oversized wooden keychain with the number 12 carved into it, and pointed me to my room down a dark corridor. I got to my room, turned the key, and walked into a space that smelled of mildew and old cigarettes. The wallpaper was peeling, and the bed looked like it had seen one too many sleepless nights. But at that point, I didn't care. I just wanted to collapse and get a few hours of sleep. I lay down, and for a while it was peaceful. But then, I heard it. Footsteps. Heavy, slow footsteps echoing down the corridor outside my door. I figured it was just another guest checking in. But they didn't stop. Whoever it was kept walking back and forth, right outside my door. The floorboards creaked with every step, like they were carrying a weight far too heavy. I sat up, straining to hear, but they just kept pacing. And then they stopped right outside my door. My heart was pounding. I wanted to get up, to look through the peephole, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. I just sat there, staring at the door, listening to the silence on the other side. Minutes passed, but it felt like hours. And then, just as suddenly as the footsteps had stopped, they started again, this time fading away down the hallway until everything was quiet. I convinced myself it was nothing, probably just someone who got lost or was drunk. But the unsettling feeling stayed with me, like something was just off about this place. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was just being paranoid, but deep down, I knew this was going to be a long, long night. I finally managed to close my eyes and drift off to sleep, but it felt like I'd only been out for a minute when I woke up again. This time, it wasn't footsteps. It was this strange feeling, like someone was watching me. My eyes snapped open, and the room was dark except for the pale glow of the streetlight leaking through the blinds. I sat up and glanced around, trying to figure out what had woken me up, and that's when I saw them, tiny holes in the wall, almost like nail holes. They were scattered in a weird way, too deliberate to be random, like they were there for a reason. I got up, walked closer, and pressed my eye against one of the holes, trying to see what was on the other side. But it was just darkness. Then I remembered the strange feeling that someone was watching me, and a chill ran down my spine. I grabbed a bit of tissue from the bathroom and stuffed it into the holes, covering them as best as I could. Probably just nothing, I whispered to myself. Just relax. But the more I tried to convince myself, the more uneasy I felt. I went back to bed, trying to brush off the feeling, but sleep wouldn't come. My heart was racing, and every little noise in the room seemed louder than it should be. The old radiator hissed, the floor creaked when I shifted my weight, but then I heard something else. Faint, scraping sound. It was coming from the wall. I sat there, holding my breath, listening to this soft scratching noise that seemed to move from one side of the wall to the other. My mind started racing with all sorts of explanations: mice, wind, pipes, but none of it made sense. The sound was too purposeful, too human, and then it stopped. I let out a breath, trying to calm myself down. But just when I was starting to think it was over, there was a loud creak. The noise came from the door, my door, like someone was trying to press it open. I bolted upright, staring at the doorknob, waiting for it to turn. But it didn't. Nothing happened, just silence. And then, just as I was about to lie back down, I heard the scratching again, this time louder, like something was clawing its way through the wall, trying to get in. I stood up, staring at the wall, wondering what the hell was happening. And that's when the phone rang. The sound sliced through the silence, making me jump. I ran to the phone on the nightstand, picked it up, and whispered, "Hello?" No answer, just breathing. Slow, heavy breathing on the other end of the line. My hand was shaking as I clutched the receiver, and I whispered, "Who is this?" The breathing stopped, and then a low voice, barely a whisper, said, "I can see you." I slammed the phone down, my heart pounding so loudly that it was all I could hear. I didn't know what to do: stay, leave, call the police. Every part of me was screaming to get out of that room, but I was frozen, trapped by my own fear. And then the scratching started again, but this time it was right behind me. I spun around, staring at the wall behind me. The scratching sound was louder now, like nails dragging across wood, coming from right where the bed was pushed against the wall. My breathing was shallow. I could feel the panic rising in my throat. I had to get out of there. I couldn't spend another second in that room. I grabbed my bag, threw on my shoes, and rushed to the door. My hands were shaking so badly that it took me a few tries to unlock it. But when I finally got it open, I bolted out into the hallway, ready to leave that nightmare behind. The corridor was long and dimly lit, the walls covered with old, peeling wallpaper, but it felt like freedom compared to that room. I started walking fast, my footsteps echoing down the hall, but as I reached the end, something caught my eye. The door of my room, number 12, was still open behind me, and just as I was about to turn away, I saw it. Movement. A shadow. Something or someone was inside my room. My instinct told me to run, get out of there as fast as I could, but something else. Maybe it was fear, maybe it was anger, made me want to know what was going on. I stepped back, trying to get a clearer look, but whoever it was stayed hidden in the shadows, just beyond the doorframe. "Hello," I called out, my voice shaking. Is someone there?" No answer, just the silence of the hallway and the distant hum of the neon sign outside. But I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever was in my room was watching me, waiting for me to make a move. That's when I noticed something else. There were scratches on the outside of my door. Deep, jagged lines that hadn't been there when I checked in. It was like someone or something had been clawing at it from the inside. My stomach twisted as I realized that whatever was scratching at the walls earlier, it wasn't just some noise. It was real. I backed away slowly, trying not to make a sound, but every step I took felt like it echoed through the entire motel. I turned to make a run for it, to the front desk, to my car, anywhere but there. and that's when I saw him. The old man, the one from the front desk. He was standing at the end of the hallway, just staring at me, and that smile, that strange, twisted smile was back on his face. "What's wrong, son?" he asked, his voice calm, almost friendly. "You're not scared, are you?" I couldn't speak. I just shook my head, trying to think of something, anything, to say. But my eyes kept darting back to the open door of my room, to the shadow moving inside, and to those scratches carved deep into the wood. The man took a step closer, and I instinctively stepped back. I think I need to leave," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I don't feel safe here." His eyes narrowed, that smile growing wider. "Oh, don't worry," he said. "You're safe here. I promise. Nothing will happen to you. Not while I'm around." That was all I needed to hear. I turned and ran, my footsteps pounding down the hallway, leaving the old man and that cursed room behind me. As I reached the front door of the motel, I threw it open, and the cold night air hit my face like a slap. But just before I ran to my car, I looked back one last time. The door to my room, it was closed now, and standing in front of it, staring right at me, was a figure dressed in black. I didn't wait to see who it was or what they wanted. I jumped in my car, started the engine, and tore out of that parking lot as fast as I could. But that figure, that shadow just standing there in the darkness, it's all I could think about as I sped down the highway, the fear gripping me like a vice. And I knew whoever was in that room wasn't done with me yet. I drove for miles, not even sure where I was going, just desperate to put as much distance between myself and that motel as possible. The darkness of the highway seemed to stretch on forever, and the only sound was the steady hum of my car's engine and my heart pounding in my chest. Finally, I found a gas station, one of those 24-hour places with flickering lights and a lone attendant behind bulletproof glass. I pulled in, parked under the lights, and just sat there for a moment, trying to catch my breath. My hands were still shaking as I reached for my phone, thinking I should call someone, tell someone about what just happened. But who would believe me? I stepped out of the car, desperate for some fresh air, and walked towards the small convenience store to grab a coffee, anything to help me clear my head. As I got to the door, I glanced up and caught a glimpse of myself in the glass, pale, eyes wide, like I had seen a ghost. Maybe I had. Inside, I was the only customer. I grabbed a cup and started pouring the coffee, trying to calm myself, trying to make sense of the whole thing. And that's when I felt it again, that unmistakable sensation of being watched. I glanced around, but there was no one else in the store, just the attendant, who was busy looking at his phone. I shook it off, trying to convince myself it was just my nerves playing tricks on me. But the feeling only grew stronger, like eyes burning into the back of my neck. I walked up to the counter to pay, trying to act normal, and handed the guy some cash. He didn't even look up, just nodded and mumbled, "Have a good night." As I took my change, I turned back towards the exit, and that's when I saw it. In the reflection of the glass door, I saw someone standing at the far edge of the parking lot, just barely visible under the faint glow of the streetlight. My stomach dropped. They were just standing there, still as a statue, and I could tell, even from that distance, that they were staring right at me. I spun around, but when I looked directly at the parking lot, there was no one there. The space was empty, just my car and the flickering lights. I rubbed my eyes, thinking maybe I was just exhausted, imagining things. But as soon as I looked back at the reflection in the glass door, they were there again, closer this time. It was the same figure I'd seen back at the motel, dark clothes, blurred features, like a shadow that had come to life. My heart raced, and I dropped my coffee, the cup shattering on the floor, hot liquid splattering everywhere. "Hey man, you all right?" The attendant called from behind the counter, finally paying attention. I forced a nod, trying to keep it together. Yeah, I'm fine," I lied, backing away slowly. But my eyes stayed locked on that reflection, on that figure that seemed to get closer every time I looked. I bolted out of the store, running back to my car, and as I got in and locked the doors, I looked back towards the parking lot. And there, standing right where I had just been, was the figure. This time, I saw them clearly tall, with dark clothes that seemed to blend into the shadows, and their head tilted, as if they were smiling. I floored it, screeching out of the gas station, my eyes darting back and forth between the road and the rearview mirror. But the parking lot was empty now, they were gone. I kept driving, praying that I was just imagining things, that it was just exhaustion playing tricks on my mind. But then I remembered the phone call, the breathing, the voice saying, "I can see you," and I realized they had followed me. Whoever they were, whatever they wanted, they were still there, watching, waiting, and I had no idea where they'd show up next. I drove for miles, not even sure where I was going, just desperate to put as much distance between myself and that motel as possible. The darkness of the highway seemed to stretch on forever, and the only sound was the steady hum of my car's engine and my heart pounding in my chest. Finally, I found a gas station, one of those 24-hour places with flickering lights and a lone attendant behind bulletproof glass. I pulled in, parked under the lights, and just sat there for a moment, trying to catch my breath. My hands were still shaking as I reached for my phone, thinking I should call someone, tell someone about what just happened. But who would believe me? I stepped out of the car, desperate for some fresh air, and walked towards the small convenience store to grab a coffee, anything to help me clear my head. As I got to the door, I glanced up and caught a glimpse of myself in the glass, pale, eyes wide, like I had seen a ghost. Maybe I had. Inside, I was the only customer. I grabbed a cup and started pouring the coffee, trying to calm myself, trying to make sense of the whole thing. And that's when I felt it again, that unmistakable sensation of being watched. I glanced around, but there was no one else in the store, just the attendant, who was busy looking at his phone. I shook it off, trying to convince myself it was just my nerves playing tricks on me. But the feeling only grew stronger, like eyes burning into the back of my neck. I walked up to the counter to pay, trying to act normal, and handed the guy some cash. He didn't even look up, just nodded and mumbled, "Have a good night." As I took my change, I turned back towards the exit, and that's when I saw it. In the reflection of the glass door, I saw someone standing at the far edge of the parking lot, just barely visible under the faint glow of the streetlight. My stomach dropped. They were just standing there, still as a statue, and I could tell, even from that distance, that they were staring right at me. I spun around, but when I looked directly at the parking lot, there was no one there. The space was empty, just my car and the flickering lights. I rubbed my eyes, thinking maybe I was just exhausted, imagining things. But as soon as I looked back at the reflection in the glass door, they were there again, closer this time. It was the same figure I'd seen back at the motel, dark clothes, blurred features, like a shadow that had come to life. My heart raced, and I dropped my coffee, the cup shattering on the floor, hot liquid splattering everywhere. "Hey man, you all right?" The attendant called from behind the counter, finally paying attention. I forced a nod, trying to keep it together. Yeah, I'm fine," I lied, backing away slowly. But my eyes stayed locked on that reflection, on that figure that seemed to get closer every time I looked. I bolted out of the store, running back to my car, and as I got in and locked the doors, I looked back towards the parking lot. And there, standing right where I had just been, was the figure. This time, I saw them clearly, tall, with dark clothes that seemed to blend into the shadows, and their head tilted, as if they were smiling. I floored it, screeching out of the gas station, my eyes darting back and forth between the road and the rearview mirror. But the parking lot was empty now, they were gone. I kept driving, praying that I was just imagining things, that it was just exhaustion playing tricks on my mind. But then I remembered the phone call, the breathing, the voice saying, "I can see you," and I realized they had followed me. Whoever they were, whatever they wanted, they were still there, watching, waiting, and I had no idea where they'd show up next. The rest of the drive felt like a blur, a frantic, panicked rush to anywhere that felt safe. I ended up pulling off the highway into a more populated area, thinking that, with more people around, I'd be harder to follow, harder to corner. I found a hotel, a proper one this time, brightly lit with a lobby full of people. Felt safe, comforting. But even as I checked in, every time I glanced out the window, I expected to see that figure watching. I made it to my room, closed the door behind me, and slid every lock in place. I drew the curtains shut, checked every corner, every closet. I was alone, finally truly alone. But sleep was the last thing on my mind. I left the TV on, not caring what was playing, just wanting some noise to drown out the silence, to make me feel less alone with my thoughts. Hours passed, and eventually exhaustion took over. I lay down on the bed, the blankets pulled tight around me, and stared at the ceiling until my eyes grew heavy, and finally, I fell asleep. It must have been around 3 a.m. when I woke up. There was this feeling, like a weight pressing down on my chest. I tried to move, but my body felt frozen, paralyzed. And then I heard it, the softest, faintest tap. 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 It was coming from the window. I lay there, my heart pounding, trying to convince myself that it was just the wind or a branch scraping against the glass. But deep down, I knew that that figure was right outside. I forced myself to move, to slowly turn my head and look towards the window. The curtain was drawn shut, but I could see the outline of a shadow standing behind it, shifting slightly, as if they were leaning closer, pressing their ear to the glass. Listening. I sat up, my heart racing, and stumbled over to the window. My hands trembled as I reached for the curtain, pulling it back just an inch to peek outside. And there, pressed up against the glass, was a face. Pale, hollow eyes staring right back at me, lips curled into a grin that seemed to stretch too wide, too unnaturally. I jumped back, letting the curtain fall shut, my whole body shaking. Whoever it was, they were trying to get in, and I was trapped, alone in that room. I reached for the phone on the nightstand, frantically dialing the front desk. "Someone's outside my window," I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady. "Please, send someone up now." The operator's voice was calm, almost bored. "Sir, all our windows face the courtyard. There's no access to them from the outside. Are you sure you're not just imagining things?" No, I'm telling you, there's someone there," I shouted, my eyes darting back to the window. I could see the shadow shifting, moving closer to the edge of the curtain. "Please, just send someone." It all started as a fun idea, exploring abandoned places with my friends, hunting for those forgotten, eerie spots that always seemed to have a story hidden in their walls. It was our thing, you know? We'd head out on weekends, find some place that had been left to rot, and we'd take photos, share spooky stories, and let our imaginations run wild. It was all just a thrill. So that night, when we found an old, isolated house at the end of a dirt road, we were all in. The house looked like it had been forgotten for decades. Shingles falling off the roof, windows broken, vines crawling up the sides like they were trying to swallow the whole place. It was the perfect find. The moon was high, casting just enough light to make everything look even creepier, and the air was heavy with that damp, earthy smell of decay. We parked the car at the side of the road, and as we got closer, I could feel this weird vibe coming from the house, like it was warning us to stay away, but at the same time, pulling us in with the promise of whatever secrets it held inside. We all felt it. Even my buddy Jake, who usually laughs off anything remotely scary, looked uneasy for a second, but none of us said anything. We were too excited to let something like that stop us. The front door was barely hanging on its hinges, so getting in wasn't an issue. We pushed it open, and it made this low, groaning creak, like the house itself was waking up from some long, dark sleep. I flicked on my flashlight, the beam slicing through the thick dust in the air. The place was a mess, old furniture covered in moldy sheets, cracked picture frames hanging crookedly on the walls, and newspapers scattered across the floor, yellowed with age. "Guys, check this out," Jake whispered, pointing to an old family photo on a nearby table. It was of a man, woman, and two kids, their faces blurred from water damage, but their eyes looked like they were staring right at us. I don't know if it was just the light, or maybe my imagination, but they seemed to follow me as I moved. We split up, everyone going to explore different parts of the house. I found myself drawn to the living room, where there was this old fireplace with blackened bricks and a torn-up sofa in front of it. I pulled out my phone to take a few pictures, trying to capture the spooky atmosphere, when I noticed something strange in one of the shots. The mirror over the fireplace. It was covered in dust, sure, but right in the middle of it, there was a handprint, like someone had wiped away the dust, leaving this perfect, clear handprint behind. I turned around, scanning the room. "Hey, did one of you guys touch the mirror?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "Nope," came a voice from the hallway. "Why?" I swallowed hard and shook my head. "No reason," I lied, but I knew no one had gone near it. We'd all just come in, and the dust was undisturbed everywhere else. But there was one thing that hit me, and it made my stomach drop. The handprint. It was fresh, and bigger than any of our hands. We kept exploring, telling ourselves it was just some prank from whoever had been here last. But the deeper we went into the house, the more the air seemed to grow heavy, like it was getting harder to breathe. And that feeling of being watched, it only got stronger. I couldn't shake it, the sense that we weren't alone, that whatever was in this house didn't want us there, and maybe, just maybe, it was already aware of us. As we kept moving through the house, that eerie feeling of being watched grew stronger, like there were eyes hidden in the walls, following every step we took. The air was thick, stale, and it felt like it was wrapping around me, making it hard to breathe. But the thing that really set me on edge were the sounds. It started as a low whisper, so faint that at first, I thought it was just the wind slipping through the cracks in the walls. But then it grew louder, more distinct, like actual voices, muffled and distant. But there, I glanced over at Jake, and by the look on his face, I knew he was hearing it too. "What is that?" he whispered, trying to sound calm but failing miserably. I shook my head, holding a finger to my lips to signal for silence. I strained my ears, trying to make out the whispers. It was just nonsense at first, soft, incoherent murmurs, but then it became clear. I couldn't make out every word, but one thing was certain. It sounded like chanting, a low, rhythmic chant in a language I didn't understand, and it was coming from upstairs. Jake and I shared a look, a mix of excitement and pure terror. We motioned for the others to come over, and soon our whole group stood at the base of the staircase, staring up into the dark, where the chanting seemed to swirl like smoke. "Let's just go up, check it out, and then we can get the hell out of here," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. No one argued. We all wanted to see what was going on up there, but none of us wanted to be the first to make a move. Finally, Jake stepped forward, flashlight in hand, and started climbing the stairs. Each step creaked loudly under his weight, like the house was protesting our intrusion. I followed close behind, and soon we were all slowly making our way up, one careful step at a time. When we reached the top, the chanting was louder, echoing through the hallway like it was coming from all around us. It felt wrong, like it was burrowing into my head, making my skin crawl. We moved down the hall, the floorboards groaning under our feet, until we came to a closed door. The chanting was definitely coming from inside. I took a deep breath, and my hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob. It felt cold, like ice, and as soon as I touched it, the chanting stopped. Dead silence. The kind of silence that makes your ears ring, that makes your whole body tense because you just know, something's about to happen. I looked back at my friends. Their faces were pale, eyes wide. Jake nodded, and I turned the knob, slowly pushing the door open. The flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing a small, empty room. The windows were boarded up, just like downstairs, but there was something else, something I hadn't seen before. Symbols. Strange, intricate symbols drawn all over the walls and floor in what looked like ash. They spiraled and twisted, covering every surface of the room, forming circles, lines, and handprints. just like the one I'd seen on the mirror downstairs, only these were scattered everywhere, all pointing to the center of the room. And right there, in the middle of all those symbols, was an old wooden chair, and on it sat a doll. It looked handmade, sewn together with rough fabric, and its face was blank. Just two black button eyes staring straight ahead, and a wide, stitched mouth that seemed to grin at us. It was creepy as hell, but the worst part was the smoke. A thin trail of smoke was rising from the doll's lap, swirling up toward the ceiling as if something was burning inside it. The smell of sulfur and burnt wood filled the room, and suddenly, I felt dizzy, like the whole world was spinning around me. I stepped back, bumping into Jake, who cursed under his breath, and we all just stood there, frozen, staring at that doll, feeling like we had just walked into something we were never supposed to see. And then, the whispers started again, louder this time, clearer, but this time, they were coming from right behind us. The whispers, they were right behind us like breath on the back of my neck. My whole body tensed, and I couldn't bring myself to turn around. It was like a voice was hissing directly into my ear, low, raspy, and in a language I couldn't understand. I could hear it weaving through my thoughts, making my skin crawl. Jake grabbed my arm, snapping me out of it. "We need to leave now," he whispered, his voice shaking. Everyone was already backing out of the room, moving slowly, eyes locked on the doll in that chair, as if it might spring to life at any moment. The smoke had gotten thicker, swirling around like it was alive, and those symbols on the walls seemed to pulse, almost like they were moving with the smoke, reacting to it. The whispers grew louder, overlapping like 1,000 voices speaking at once, and I finally spun around, desperate to find the source. The hallway behind us was empty. No one there, no one whispering, but the air felt thick and heavy, like it was vibrating with energy, and my flashlight beam flickered wildly, struggling to stay lit. And then, we heard it, a loud thump from downstairs, like something heavy had fallen or been thrown across the floor. The whole house seemed to groan with the impact, like the walls were bending inwards. We all froze, listening, waiting, and then it came again. Thump, closer this time, like it was coming up the stairs. "Go, go, go, go," I hissed, grabbing Jake and pushing him towards the hallway. We ran, stumbling over ourselves as we made our way to the stairs, the whispers now a constant hiss all around us. But just as we reached the top of the staircase, I felt something cold wrap around my ankle, like a hand. I yanked my leg free and nearly fell down the stairs, catching myself on the banister just in time. The stairs creaked and groaned under our weight as we barreled down, one after the other, but they felt longer, like we were running and running, but the bottom never seemed to get any closer. And with every step, that thump behind us grew louder, more frantic, like something was coming after us, chasing us, and it was gaining. Jake was the first to hit the bottom, and I was right behind him. We darted towards the front door, ready to break it down if we had to, but as we reached it, it slammed shut, hard, with a force that shook the entire house. I grabbed the handle, twisting and pulling as hard as I could, but it wouldn't budge. It felt like it was welded shut, like the house wasn't going to let us leave. "Move!" Jake shouted, shoving me out of the way and throwing his shoulder into the door, again and again trying to force it open. The wood splintered under his weight, but still it held. And all the while, the thump was getting louder, closer, until it was right behind us. I turned around, flashlight in hand, shining it up the stairs, and that's when I saw it, a figure, just a shadow at first, coming down slowly. I couldn't make out any features, just the outline of a person. And then I realized it was holding something. The doll. The same doll from the upstairs room, but now, it was different. It was smoking more heavily, and its button eyes glinted in the beam of my flashlight, staring right at me. I felt my throat go dry, my legs trembling. The whispers, they were coming from the figure. A deep, droning chant that was like nails scraping against my skull. I couldn't look away, couldn't move, as it slowly descended the stairs, step by step, holding that burning doll out in front of it like an offering. Jake rammed the door one last time, And finally, it gave way. We stumbled out into the night, hitting the cold air like a shock, and bolted for the car. We didn't stop to look back, didn't stop to breathe, until we were all piled into the car, slamming the doors shut and locking them. Jake fumbled with the keys, starting the engine with shaking hands. And as the car roared to life, I looked back at the house, just in time to see the front door swing open slowly, creaking on its hinges. And there, standing in the doorway, was the figure, just watching us. The doll still cradled in its hands, smoke trailing from its lap like a beacon in the night. We peeled out of there, tires screeching, the house fading into the darkness behind us. And even though we were miles away before we spoke a single word, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was in that house was still with us, that maybe we'd brought something back, something that wasn't going to let go. We drove for what felt like hours, not saying a word, just the sound of the engine and our heavy breathing filling the silence. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what just happened, but none of it added up. I kept glancing back, half expecting to see that figure standing on the side of the road, just watching us drive away with that awful, smoking doll in its hands. Jake finally broke the silence. "What the hell was that?" he muttered, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel. No one answered. There was nothing to say. We were all too shaken to even try to explain it. When we got back to Jake's place, we stumbled out of the car, desperate to be somewhere familiar, somewhere safe. We filed into his living room, locking the door behind us, double-checking every window, every possible entrance. Once we were all inside, the adrenaline started to wear off and the exhaustion hit. We sat there, huddled together in silence, the events of the night still replaying in our heads. Then we noticed something off. It was a smell. That same smell from the house, burnt wood, sulfur, smoke creeping into the room. At first, we thought it was our clothes. Maybe the scent had stuck to us. But as we all looked around, sniffing the air, we realized it was coming from one place. My bag. I stared at it, my stomach twisting into knots. I'd left my bag in the corner of the room when we walked in, and now the smell was pouring out of it, heavy and sour. "No way. There's no way," I mumbled, shaking my head as I got up and unzipped it. Inside, everything looked normal at first. My flashlight, my jacket, a few random things I tossed in there before we left. But then, right at the bottom, I found something that shouldn't have been there. A piece of fabric. Rough, dark fabric like the material the doll had been made of. I pulled it out slowly, my fingers trembling, and as I did, ash fell from it, spilling onto the floor. What is that?" Jake whispered, backing away. "I don't know," I muttered, my voice barely a whisper. But as I held the fabric up to the light, the smell of smoke got stronger and I realized it was a piece of the doll. Somehow, someway, it had gotten into my bag. But that wasn't possible. None of us had touched it. None of us had even gotten close to it. I dropped it like it burned me, and the ash scattered across the floor, leaving a dark stain on the carpet. And that's when we all heard it, a faint scratching sound, coming from inside the walls. At first, it was just a soft scrape like something dragging across the drywall, but then it got louder, sharper, like nails raking down the wall, getting closer and closer. Jake grabbed a baseball bat from the corner, holding it like he was ready to swing at whatever came out. The rest of us backed into the center of the room, our eyes darting around, trying to find the source of the sound. The walls seemed to close in on us, the scratching growing louder, surrounding us from all sides. And then, suddenly, it stopped. The silence was suffocating. No one moved, no one even breathed. And that's when the lights flickered. Once, twice, and then they went out completely, plunging us into total darkness. I fumbled for my flashlight, the one I'd had in the house, and flicked it on, its narrow beam slicing through the dark. I swung it around the room, and for a second, it felt like we were back in that house, trapped, surrounded, nowhere to go. And then the beam landed on something that made my blood run cold. Handprints, dozens of them, black, ash-stained handprints smeared all over the walls, just like the ones we'd seen upstairs in the house. They were fresh, wet, like they'd just been made. And right in the middle of the wall, clear as day, was a message scrawled in ash. "You shouldn't have come." The room felt like it was spinning. The whispers started again, hissing through the dark, and I swore I could see shapes moving in the shadows, circling us, closing in. I could feel them pressing against me, cold fingers brushing my skin, and all I wanted was to get out, to escape whatever was happening. Jake swung the bat at the wall, yelling for whatever it was to leave us alone, but it didn't matter. The whispers only grew louder. The handprints multiplied, spreading like a dark, oily stain across the walls, the floor, the ceiling. And just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, the lights snapped back on, and everything went silent. The whispers stopped. The scratching was gone. But the handprints, they were still there, burned into the walls like scars. And the message, "You shouldn't have come." We sat there, stunned, our minds unable to process what we were seeing. But one thing was clear. Whatever we'd disturbed in that house, it had followed us, and it wasn't going to let us go. We sat there, surrounded by those handprints, the message staring back at us like a curse etched into the walls. The silence that followed was almost unbearable, like the air had been sucked out of the room. And deep down, I knew we couldn't stay there. Whatever had followed us from that house was here now, with us, and it wasn't going to leave. "Grab your stuff," Jake said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We need to get out of here." No one argued. We threw on our jackets, grabbed our bags, not caring what we left behind, and bolted for the door. My heart was pounding, every hair on the back of my neck standing up like I was being watched. I could still smell the smoke, thick and heavy, trailing us out of the house as we ran for the car. The drive was a blur. I don't remember who was driving or where we were going, just the urge to be far, far away. But no matter how fast we drove, that feeling stayed. Like something was right behind us, chasing us down every road, lurking around every corner. We finally ended up at my place, small, cramped, but familiar. We piled inside, locking every door and window, trying to calm our nerves. For a while, it was just the sound of our heavy breathing and the distant hum of the traffic outside. The handprints didn't follow us here. The whispers were gone, and I let out a shaky breath, trying to convince myself that it was over, that whatever was haunting us had stayed behind. But then my phone buzzed. I almost didn't check it, just a notification, a text message. I pulled it out of my pocket, expecting to see a spam message or some late-night update. But when I unlocked my phone, I froze. It was a photo, sent from an unknown number, and it was of us, all of us, huddled together right there in my living room. The photo had been taken just moments ago, from outside the window, as if someone was standing in the shadows, watching. "Guys," I whispered, my voice trembling as I held up the phone. "Look at this." The room went dead quiet as they all leaned in, eyes wide, faces pale. How is that possible?" Jake stammered, his voice breaking. But there was no time to answer, no time to think, because at that moment, the knocking started. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. On the window right behind me. I spun around, flashlight in hand, shining it through the blinds, but all I saw was darkness. I couldn't tell if there was anyone out there, just my own reflection staring back at me, wide-eyed and terrified. The knocking came again, louder this time, like whatever was out there was demanding to be let in. "Stay back," I yelled, though my voice cracked with fear. The others were frozen, staring at the window, waiting for whatever came next. And then, from the opposite side of the room, another knock, and another, and another. It was like the whole place was surrounded, something, or somethings, banging on every door, every window, trying to force their way in. The noise was deafening, coming from all sides, echoing through the walls like the house itself was coming apart. I backed away, clutching my flashlight like it was a weapon, my back pressed against the wall, eyes darting around, looking for a way out. And that's when I noticed it. In the middle of the room, right where we had been sitting just moments ago, was the doll. The same doll from the house. It was lying there, perfectly still, its button eyes staring up at the ceiling, and that smoke, that awful sulfurous smoke, was rising from its mouth. The whispers returned, louder than ever, hissing in my ears, filling my head until I couldn't think. The room felt like it was spinning, the walls closing in, and every instinct told me to get away, to get as far from that doll as possible. But I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, and then the doll's head turned, slowly, almost imperceptibly, but it turned, facing me, and those black button eyes locked onto mine. The stitching on its mouth seemed to curl up, like it was smiling, and the whispers, they formed a word, just one, clear as day. Run. I didn't need to be told twice. I grabbed my friends, pulling them towards the door, throwing it open and sprinting out into the night, leaving the doll, the whispers, and that house far behind. We ran until our legs gave out, until we couldn't hear the knocking anymore, until the only sound was our gasping breaths in the cold, dark air. None of us said a word. There was nothing left to say. We'd disturbed something that night, something we didn't understand, and it wasn't going to let us go. Wherever we went, it followed, in the smell of smoke that clung to our clothes, in the whispers that seemed to come from nowhere, and in the shadows, always just out of sight. We were haunted, and no matter how far we ran, how fast we drove, how hard we tried to forget, we couldn't escape it. And deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time before whatever was out there came back for us.